78% of Earth's atmosphere, but only 19 thousandths of a percent of Earth's crust. It is so crucial to life that some plants eat animals to get it.
All right, so how
What
we
is
doing?
it? Nitrogen. Today, we're going to talk with author Joe Levine about how this essential element binds the living and the non-living world together. Hi, Joe. Nice to meet you.
Likewise, for sure.
So I've got some questions about nitrogen for you today.
And I'll try and answer them the best I can.
So, how does nitrogen connect the living and the non-living parts of the environment?
Right, that's a good question, and it's not a simple one to answer because the way that nitrogen moves around between living and non-living parts of the biosphere makes it one of the most complicated of all the cycles of matter that we're concerned with when we study biology. It goes through the atmosphere, it goes through the soil, it goes through water, it passes through plants, it passes through animals. So all of that makes up the nitrogen cycle.
How does the nitrogen cycle move nitrogen from the atmosphere to the soil?
The way that happens in nature is that there are various kinds of bacteria that actually take nitrogen gas out of the atmosphere. They break the nitrogen molecules apart and they combine the nitrogen atoms with oxygen in various proportions to create nitrites and nitrates. And those are solid. They also can dissolve in water, which makes them available to both aquatic photosynthetic organisms, algae, water plants, and so on, and also makes it available for regular land plants that absorb it from soil water.
How does nitrogen get from the soil into the bodies of the plants and animals?
Well, plants absorb it directly from the soil or from soil water or even from water itself, and they incorporate it into proteins and various compounds that they make in their bodies. Animals obtain nitrogen and other nutrients by eating plants, or at least plant-eating animals get them directly from the plants. They break them down and they reassemble them into amino acids and the proteins that animals use in our bodies. And then, of course, there are other animals that are carnivores. They get the nitrogen by eating organisms that have ultimately obtained it from plants.
So, what happens if organisms can't get enough nitrogen?
Well, if they can't get enough nitrogen, there's a lot of compounds that they can't make. If plants don't get enough nitrogen, they can't make chlorophyll and other things of that nature. Both humans, other animals, and plants need nitrogen in order to build proteins because they're an important component of proteins.
So, can a farmer with depleted soil just add fertilizer to get nitrogen?
The trick is to put nitrogen on farm fields in the right amounts and at the right time. Because if you put too much nitrogen on certain kinds of soils and put it down at the wrong time in terms of what the weather's doing and how the plants are growing, it can wash through the soil, end up washing into streams and rivers or get into groundwater, and in all of those places, excess nitrogen can cause problems.
So, how can using fertilizers disrupt the nitrogen cycle?
Well, again, it's a question of scale. What's interesting is that we now fix through chemical processes that make fertilizers, we fix twice as much nitrogen as is normally circulating around in the biosphere. It's really bizarre. This is one of the nutrient cycles that we've really basically overwhelmed with human activity. And that's why we can really screw up a bunch of ecosystems by just indiscriminately putting this stuff down.
So, are there any real-world examples of this?
Oh yeah, the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is a perfect example. Again, caused by the use of nitrogen-containing fertilizers all up and down the Mississippi River and its tributaries, gets dumped into the Gulf of Mexico, and then bingo. In different environments, different nutrients tend to limit primary production. In many bodies of fresh water, the limiting nutrient is phosphorus. Okay? In the ocean, the limiting nutrient is most often, not always, but most often nitrogen. So this nitrogen is sort of sliding down the Mississippi, not being taken up in large quantities by organisms naturally, and then it gets dumped into the ocean, and the photosynthesizers there go bananas. You know, they just really start photosynthesizing to beat the band. And when they produce these major algal blooms, those in turn can produce these dead zones.
Wow. So, can anything be done to prevent dead zones?
Well, it's very interesting because here's a place where you get all different kinds of research from different fields working together to try and figure out a little tweak here, a little tweak there, something else there. One technique is this idea of micromanaging the application of nitrogen so you don't put too much on the fields. Another approach is to restore wetlands along the banks of rivers. There used to be a lot of marshes, swamps, and things like that all along the Mississippi, and many of those have been filled or drained, and the Mississippi has kind of been channeled in ways that don't allow those ecosystems to filter the water the way they used to. Because it used to be that the Mississippi would overflow its banks periodically, and the wetlands would eagerly suck up that nitrogen and turn it into plant material. And now a lot of those wetlands don't do that. So restoring wetlands works both for flood control and also for helping to control the nitrogen problem.
Well, that's really cool. And thank you for interviewing with me.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you.